So Ravi, good evening, right? How's it going? What's happening?
Going well. So before we start, we must mention we go long way back.
Right.
Uh, at least 15 years back. We
15
got
years. Yeah.
yes, we joined college in 2005, and I
Right.
think on the first day or second day of college, I remember meeting you,
Right.
and we had this interaction. And in fact, you were one of the first people I met in college, if I remember correctly.
Right. Right. And you and Ankush were the first two people that I met in college. So Ankush
Yeah,
was first, and second was you.
yeah,
And
yeah.
at that point of time, we were talking about branches. Then, which branch? What
Yes.
happened there? Something of that sort.
Completely different set of questions we had at that time.
Right.
Now our priorities have changed. We talk about completely different stuff.
Right.
And that
So
is
let's start from your school part, right? You came to college. Where were you in school? What were you doing then?
so I passed out from school in 2004.
Mhm.
So like most of the people of our generation did, I also wrote competitive exams. Didn't
Yeah.
succeed in the first attempt. Uh, took a year off and
Mhm.
again wrote the exam. Got into
Mhm.
DC in 2005.
Right.
Wanted to take computer science. That was my first preference,
Mhm.
but I was not getting it. So the next best option was IT. It was a
Mhm.
new branch at that time,
Right.
but it had a lot of overlap with the courses which are taught in computer science. So I thought I would take IT, and it turned out to be the right decision. I
Right.
can say in hindsight.
Right.
So that's how the transition from school to college happened.
Okay. And how was you like in school? What were you thinking? When did you decide that you'll take up engineering, or was that a generic decision that happens for a science student to write competitive exams and possibly go into engineering? Or did you really think that you want to be an engineer?
Incidentally, this was the first question which was asked to me in my UPSC interview.
Okay.
The chairman of the UPSC panel asked me, why did you become an engineer if you wanted to get into civil services? The government spent so much money in
Mhm.
training you, and now you have switched your core competency and trying for something different.
Mhm.
So the answer to that is, fortunately or unfortunately, in the Indian system, till we are in class 12th, we are sort of
Right.
in autopilot mode.
Right.
We, at least at that time, I didn't have that exposure and understanding that what are
Mhm.
the career options I have.
Mhm.
So maybe some pressure from the parents and what I could see my peers doing. So
Mhm.
engineering looked like the most obvious option. I maybe today's generation is more aware and more exposed to different career options. At that time, my vision and exposure was very limited. So
Right.
I simply just followed what others were doing, what my parents asked me to do. So only
Right.
when I got into college, I saw the horizon was very big and very wide, and there are many things to do.
Mhm. So I remember you from 2005, Rooney jersey. So people still call you Rooney in the new in ecosystem, or do you have another name now?
So all the people from the college days still call me Rooney,
Hmm.
and there's an interesting story behind it. I used to follow Manchester United, especially Wayne Rooney, who
Hmm.
used to be the forward striker for Manchester United, and
Right.
I got his jersey from Palika Bazaar,
Hmm.
and I was wearing it on the first day of college,
Hmm.
and seniors called us for some ragging. At that
Hmm.
time, the ragging was
Bit
still
of
in
ragging,
a
yeah,
bit of ragging was still in healthy ragging. It
yeah.
was in vogue, and they saw the Rooney name written on my T-shirt,
Hmm.
and one of the seniors called me Rooney, and from that day onwards, my
Right,
everybody started calling me Rooney.
right. No, no, it's a pretty famous name. You went on to become our CR also. Yeah. So, what other stories do you recall from college? There's so many stories from hostel.
Yeah, there are many stories. It was very interesting. Getting into college, the first
Mhm.
day, the first semester is very exciting, also
Right,
intimidating.
right.
You're entering into a new world. First time you're stepping outside the comfort of your house.
Hmm.
Till your school time, you still are in a cocoon. In
Right,
college, you are on your own, so you have to
yeah,
deal with the curriculum, the teachers, the seniors. So
right.
you learn to
You're off your own that way.
yeah, you're of
In
your
that.
own.
Mhm.
So it's a very interesting experience. So you make friends. I think for me, the obviously our college taught us a lot of things, but
Mhm.
for me, the biggest uh, takeaway from the college is my friends, because I spent
Right.
a lot of time during college with my friends, which I
Yeah.
don't get now. So the bond which I
Yeah.
made at that time, I value it a lot.
Right. That's the way to go about it. So one thing that I really remember that possibly you can share, you became CR and you had a difficult batch to manage, right? IT was not an easy batch, and you are not that kind of a person that will be able to manipulate a lot of people in the right way. You are the rightful person and doing the right thing in the right way. So how was it? Was it difficult? What were your learnings from there?
So for the people who don't know what CR is, CR stands for class representative.
Right.
So initially, I had no idea what is the job of CR, what it entails. It just sounded cool in first year of college, and
Right.
they were looking for a person who could be a class representative.
Mhm.
And without introspecting or pondering over it, I just volunteered out of sheer curiosity, out of sheer instinct, I would say.
Mhm.
And it turned out I had to take care of some responsibilities, and that was my first taste of taking responsibilities in college,
Mhm.
managing the interests of students, representing those interests to the faculty, conveying the message of faculty to the students, uh, balancing both the interests. So it was a good learning experience. Also had fun doing it,
Mhm.
because at least in that age you feel nice when people recognize you for something. You
Right.
get a sense of recognition, so it made you feel good.
Yeah. So I have a couple of stories that I'll talk about then. So see, Rooney, one of the things that personally happened with me is that a lot, as you said, right, you made friends, but I learned a lot from people. And one in specific incident that left a big impression on me from first year. I asked you, "Tum kahan se ho?" Something of this sort. I asked you, "Where are you from?" And you said, "I'm a Bihari." This is what you said. And at that point of time, the kind of ecosystem that we were living in, although we did not differentiate between people, but Bihari was not treated with respect. And we had a brief discussion there, and that left a big impression on me. And from that is one thing. And there are a couple of more incidents that I'll tell you that I learned personally from you that made me, as in, learn so much. And there are a couple of other things. But when you said that, when I asked you that, where are you from? And you said, I'm a Bihari. And you said that in English, and you said that in a particular tone. What do you remember what was going in your head? Did you feel something over a period of time? What happened at that point of time? Is there a background to it?
Yeah, I've been asked a lot of times. So even in my school, I've stayed in hostel since
Hmm.
I was in class six.
Hmm.
And whenever you meet somebody, people ask you where you're from.
Hmm.
And when I had recently joined my school hostel,
Right.
so maybe because of the prevailing perceptions about Bihar, there was a tinge of feeling that you may be judged if you tell somebody you're from Bihar. But
Right.
at that age itself, I was around 10 when I shifted to Delhi from Patna.
Hmm.
And I realized it's very important that you embrace your roots, where you're from.
Right.
And from that point onwards, I was very comfortable with it. As in,
Hmm.
I've seen people, if they have some kind of complex with some part of their identity, either they suppress it or they try to overcompensate it by being aggressive.
Right.
So that is also a sign of discomfort in that person, that he or she is not comfortable. So
Hmm.
if you're actually comfortable with who you are, then it should be very plain and simple. It's a
Right.
fact. And
Hmm.
if there are some people who are judging it, I don't
Hmm.
think you should care so much about them.
Right. So, is there any other thing that when you spend about 4 years, did you get inspired from something? Did you see one is the exposure part in the college? You get to see so many kids from across the country. There are different mindsets, different sorts of people. A pretty good a bunch of talented people as well. Do you have something that you learned? You played basketball as well. You're part of the sports team there. Do you have something that inspired you there in terms of anything that you saw?
So curriculum wise, I had always been interested in coding. So even in school, I used to code a lot on C and C++.
Mhm.
In fact, I had coded 3 or 4 games on C++. I remember. In fact, my final project in class 12th, I had made a game very similar to, if you remember, there used to be a game called Dave, Dangerous Dave.
Right, right.
So that was something I tried to carry forward in college also. But to be honest, I couldn't do justice to it because I was giving more time to other extracurricular activities like basketball.
Mhm,
So during my drop year and even in 11th and 12th, there's a
mhm.
lot of pressure. You taking those coaching classes for IITs, and because
Right.
of that, you're not able to give time to the things you actually like doing, like playing sports. So I wanted to make up for that time. So I started playing basketball very regularly and took it very religiously.
Mhm,
And it also gave me an opportunity to work in a team.
mhm.
So the good part about playing any sport, especially team sports, is you learn a lot about how the team dynamics work.
Right.
So for example, a lot of lessons, life lessons I've learned from basketball.
Mhm.
Uh, One of them being it's very important in a team to identify what role can be played by each person.
Right.
Everybody cannot do everything. So as a leader, as a captain, it's very important not only you recognize what role a person can play, but also convince that person that you are made for this role. That makes that person even better,
Mhm.
and you get more out of that person.
Right.
Similarly, with sports, you win and you lose. So
Right.
it's very important that you become comfortable with losing, not in a bad sense, like obviously one should always strive for winning,
Mhm,
but you learn to bounce back every time. You
mhm.
learn to take loss in the right stride, and you learn from your past experience, and you make those
Try to
changes.
improve. Yeah.
Yeah. So those are the things I learned from basketball.
Right. You traveled to a few colleges as well. You went on to tours, competing in different colleges in the ecosystem as well. And you would have
Yeah.
learned something there as well, meeting different kinds of people from different colleges, different courses they were in. They all were not engineers, right? You did not just
Yeah.
go to engineering colleges.
Yeah, we used to have these tournaments. So one tournament I specifically remember, there's a college in Delhi. So
Right.
they had
Maulana Azad Medical
Maulana
College. Yeah.
Medical College. So they
Right.
had this tournament, and their basketball court was right in the middle of their hostel. So
Mhm,
there was this basketball court, and there were hostels around it. And whenever you played against the home team,
mhm.
people would stand in their balconies and hooted with bottles in their hands. So it was a very hostile environment. The
Mhm.
first time I went there, people are abusing you, screaming at you, and I got a little scared.
Mhm.
So, like a couple of my seniors told me, like, don't even look
Bother.
at them. No, yeah, don't get bothered. So again, that's one of the life lessons I learned.
Mhm.
You focus on your job, what you have come to do. Don't get distracted by unnecessary things.
Right.
So, and we actually beat that team, and it felt very nice. Like if you
Right.
actually focus on
And
your job, yeah,
yeah, on
in
the
there,
home turf, you
yeah,
you get
yeah,
to beat someone. Yeah.
yeah. So those were interesting experiences.
Yeah, surely. So, but in 2009, right, it was a tough year. 2008, Lehman Brothers fell apart. 2009 was a tough year for the country. You were passing at that point of time, and you had this in mind that you want to be a civil servant at that point of time. When did that came into your head? That you want to go for civil services?
At the back of my head, I wanted to be a civil servant, but honestly, I wasn't confident that I can put in so many hours of hard work to crack that exam.
Right.
So I had mentally dismissed myself that I'll not be able to work so hard. So
Hmm.
better take up a job and then write get the CAT exam, which everyone was doing, and do an
Hmm.
MBA.
Hmm.
But because of the 2008 fiasco,
Hmm.
I got a job call, but my uh, the date of joining was postponed because of the
Right.
crisis.
Right.
And then I eventually landed up in EY.
Hmm.
And I liked the job there, but I was working very hard. I was logging for 13, 14 hours a day.
Mhm.
And then I realized if I can work so hard
Mhm.
in EY,
Mhm.
because earlier I thought I would never be able to slog so hard. So I
Right.
thought maybe I can study for the civil services exam also. So
Mhm.
why not? This job is nice. I can always come back and do this. But
Mhm.
civil services has an age limit
Right.
and time was going by. So I thought, why not give it a shot so that I don't have any regrets in life? And
Mhm.
the basic reason behind that was civil services, working in the government gives you a very broad canvas.
Right.
So even EY is a very big company, and I enjoyed the job. There are many big companies where the canvas, I'm not saying is small, but the kind of canvas the government gives you to work on, especially in India, because
Right.
India still being a developing country, there's so
Mhm.
many problems to be solved,
Right.
and there is kind of satisfaction and fulfillment you get when you solve the problems which are primarily not meant to increase profit but actually impact people's lives.
People. Mhm.
And also there is an element of diversity. You might get monotony if you are working in the same kind of domain day in day
Mhm.
out. The
Mhm.
government gives you an opportunity to work across different sectors. So I thought that that was very interesting, and that's why it was only a matter of my ability to work hard to crack the exam. I always had this idea and at the back of my head that
Mhm.
I would any day want to work for the government. But
Mhm.
once I had the confidence that if I can slog for 14 hours when I was working in EY, I
Mhm.
thought I can study and I should give it a shot.
And that is what we want to learn from you. So let's talk about your book. What came in your head when you thought that you should write a book?
So I used to write a lot, but I used to write short essays. I had always been interested in philosophy,
Mhm.
and that's why one of the optional subjects for my civil services exam, I had taken philosophy as a subject. Although I didn't have a formal education in philosophy, I
Mhm.
took philosophy and public administration. So because of that, I got the opportunity to read even more about philosophy. So,
Okay.
so the civil services exams has a defined syllabus, which is
Mhm.
almost at par with the undergraduate level. So
Right.
whatever is taught in a philosophy curriculum at the undergraduate level,
Mhm.
uh, we had a similar syllabus for the exam. So I got to read a lot about the philosophers, the different kinds of philosophy, Indian philosophy, Western philosophy, political philosophy, philosophy of religion.
Mhm.
So that helped me enrich myself, and I learned more about the questions which used to bother me even before that. I
Right.
just realized that certain things I used to ridicule myself, that what is the point of thinking something like that. And when I read someone like Immanuel Kant, and I
Mhm.
said, this guy 300 years ago, even he
Mhm.
was thinking about it. So after all, it's not a very stupid question to ask.
Mhm.
It's a very valid question. A lot of people have already pondered over it.
Right.
So from there on, I uh, got a little more confident about pondering over these questions. Earlier, I used to think it's a waste of time,
Mhm.
and then I started writing a little bit. And
Mhm.
one of the days I remember, I was generally pondering over one of those questions, and
Mhm.
something just clicked, and I
Mhm.
thought I got a framework in my mind. It's called the information processing framework.
IPA that you call
IPA.
in your book.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So when I actually did some research, I realized that people have already worked on this framework. It's
Mhm.
nothing new. So
Mhm.
people in early 80s
Mhm.
have already used this model to explain how the mind works. So
Right.
the model was not new, but I was not aware that somebody has already come up with it. But I try to use that model in a very different way to
Mhm.
answer questions related to what is consciousness, what is free will, uh, general philosophical metaphysical questions of life.
So now, when you were doing all this stuff, and the canvas that you have is pretty wide, and when you work in the government and the ecosystem that is there, you get to meet a lot of people. You get to see a lot of departments out there, and as you rightly said, being in a developing country, it's about impacting lives. It's not about making money, and money would not make as in take us forward in all those ways because it'll take time. but impacting life is one such big thing. And when you talk about this book, right, I remember one of your talks at TEDx talk that you did on job satisfaction at IIT Delhi. If you can elaborate a bit on what you really meant by job satisfaction, what you felt in.
So by that time, I had joined the IRS, Indian
Mhm.
Revenue Service, and that was my fourth job. So I had prior experience of working in the private sector. So by changing the jobs, I came to realize when I saw things in hindsight, and I questioned myself, why did I change jobs? And I came to realize that our judgment on which we decide to switch jobs, it may be based on a false premise. So I try to delve in a little deeper. And I realize whenever you are in a job, there are certain factors which affect your job satisfaction. Those factors could be what kind of remuneration you are getting, what kind of people you are working with,
Right.
what is the job content, uh, how many people your job is impacting, what kind of work life balance you're getting. Are you working for 16 hours and you don't get time for your family? And all these factors are important.
Right.
And uh, in the ideal case, in the ideal job, all these factors should be balanced. So if you are to give a score out of 10 in each of these aspects, you
Right.
would a score of 7 and above in most of the, in fact, all of those aspects, because they are all important. But in
Right.
the real world, it's almost impossible to have it.
Right.
And the reason behind is maybe when you join a job, your perception of that job is when you rate all those parameters, you might be having it 7 and above in all those parameters. But 6 months
Right.
down the line, 1 year down the line, it's a law of diminishing returns. So to talk about people, so it's human nature that you would have some differences with some people. Maybe it's your boss, maybe it's your colleague.
Right. And the more
Let's
times you spend, the more chances that's
exactly.
there.
If you're talking about remuneration, so chances are high if you see your one of your friends working in another company and he's getting a raise and you start comparing. Similarly, for all the even work-life balance.
Right.
So there could be times when the project demands more time from you and you have to put in those extra hours working on weekends. And you take only that as a sample set and you decide that this job doesn't give you work-life balance. There
Right.
could be a host of factors, and it is bound to lead you to job dissatisfaction if you're viewing your job in that way. So I realized the job satisfaction depends on the lowest common denominator. So if there are 6 factors, like I said, the people, remuneration, so 5 factors may be going your way, and there is a sixth factor,
Right.
let's say remuneration or work-life balance, and you are struggling with that. Your
Right.
remuneration, according to you, is not good, or your work-life balance is not good. So you forget about all the 5 things going the right way. You only focus on the negative part, and
Right.
then you start looking for another job which would give you correction in that parameter.
And you forget about the other
The
5.
other 5, and then you switch,
Right.
and you are happy for some day because that was a thing which was bothering you. But gradually you realize that there are a couple of more factors which are better in your other job, and you didn't actually apply your mind before taking up that job. You rushed into taking it because you were so frustrated with just that one parameter, and you switched because of that very parameter.
Right. Right.
So this process goes on. There you get frustrated about one of the 6 parameters, whichever is the lowest common denominator, and you would always have one lowest common
Right.
denominator.
And
So
it's a time factor that you're seeing in a particular factor of time or particular part of time that factor is going down, and it's a transitional thing. It's not a fixed rigid thing that will continue for 365 days altogether. And
exactly.
you keep on taking those short calls on all these things.
And also, once you're switching your job, you should make a comprehensive analysis that
Right.
these are the good things in this job, these are the bad things in this job, and every job would have something good, something bad. And what is the purpose? You should align the job analysis with what is it that you want to achieve in the longer term. And if you have that purpose, that will help you go through the tough times with the lowest common denominator. So you will have a
Right.
reason why you are bearing this, even though if you're not liking it, you're doing it. And I always give this example of working out in a gym or something. No matter
Mhm.
which aspect of life you talk about, if you don't go through a phase of doing something which you don't want to do, you
Right.
cannot have anything beautiful or anything good at the end. If you want to
Right.
make a good fit body, you have to go beyond those 10 or 15 repetitions of push-ups. When your body is saying it cannot do anymore,
Right.
the
And you have to stretch a bit. Yeah.
yeah, the extra two push-ups you do or the extra two bench presses you do when your body is giving up, when you actually don't want to do it and you force yourself to do it, those two extra repetitions actually make the muscle.
Right.
So if you always want to stay in comfort and whenever you are faced with a challenge and you do not want to do something which you don't feel like doing, it's very easy to say I don't feel like doing, so I'll not do it. But then be prepared. You're not get the goods which a normal person would get when they cross that pain barrier.
Yeah, because you spoke about a very important topic, right? I have certain queries on this because you've done enough amount of thinking and research on this. As in one thing that I get to hear from people a lot. So, whenever a job is given to them, any work that is given to them, they judge the job that is given to them. Not they do not look at the learning that can come out of that job. So if I do not like the description of the job, I'll reject it. I'll not put in my 100%. And obviously, the outcome will not be at par with what the expectation of a manager could be. On the other side, they do not even know the ideal description of the job that they wish to do. So neither they can write the ideal description, but they are very judgmental about what is given to them, and they can figure out gaps that why this job description is not the best for them. So that thing happens. It's so. What is your take on that? Did you realize or learn something about that as well?
So I can understand where these people are coming from. One thing I realized was whenever you are given some job, especially when you just come out of college, you have
Right.
very high expectations of what kind of things you would do, and you always
Right.
think I'll be doing some very fancy stuff and my intervention would bring about a big impact. But the
Right.
reality is, in any company you go, you don't have a lot to offer right now because you don't have experience. So you
Right.
have to do some so-called donkey work. It's
Right.
part of the process. So
Mhm.
even if you see very senior people across profession,
Mhm.
even when they are at, like at the peak of their ladders, even they
Mhm.
too have to do some donkey work, like
Right.
going through a document just to see if there are any typos. And
Right.
if I was given that job initially, I would say there's no intellectual stimulation in this job, why should I do it? But
Right.
one must understand, even you are not, even if you want some intellectually stimulating job, you have to do, let's say, when initially 60 to 70% donkey kind of work. And that's
Mhm.
important. Everybody goes through that phase. You do
Mhm.
70% donkey work, you get 30% intellectually stimulating work, which gives you satisfaction. And as you go up the ladder, that ratio becomes more favorable in that sense.
Right.
So it's a disillusionment which everybody experiences through experience only, I would say. But
Mhm.
whoever is listening to this,
Mhm.
I would want to give this message that no work is bad. In the initial days, whatever you do, you learn a lot, and you
Mhm.
also make a reputation for yourself. If you are actually putting your heart and mind in whatever you are doing, you would automatically get good work
Right.
because your manager, your boss would see the kind of dedication you are putting in for whatever you are given to do.
Right.
So you just need to be more patient. You'll get good work, and then it's your time to prove that you can also deliver there,
Yeah.
and that's how one grows.
So he wrote a book and he said you have to be always 100%. So which means that whether you like the job or you don't like the job, you have to give it to your 100%, and then only the transformation would occur. So a lot of people have myth, right? That once you become a CXO or a CEO or attain a particular position, you will 100% of the work that you'll do will be intellectually stimulating for you. It'll be very tough, fancy stuff that you get to see. Is that true?
I think it's absolutely false. You see anyone, like take the example of Elon Musk. So it's famously documented that he works 80, 90 hours, even 100 hours a week. Do you think
Right.
is it possible to generate 100 hours of intellectually stimulating work every week? So you have an idea, interesting idea. There is brainstorming, which everybody would like to do most of the time. But to
Right.
execute that, to implement that, there are a series of steps, and it might
Right.
not be as interesting as the ideation process. So it's important that you just not only think of good ideas, but also see that it is implemented, and implementation has all kind of things, which is not fancy at all.
Right.
It might require you to go to a shop and get printouts if the printer is not working in your office. It might require you to do cold calling. It might require you to do simple copy paste jobs, or you might require to do research on Google. Those are
Right.
all important, and everybody does that.
Right. So this is one part, right? So there are three ways to learn for any individual, right? He can do it through self-realization. Possibly he can read certain book, and he can have mentors. So people don't understand that all three are important, right? You can't rely on a mentor to do everything for you, and it is not that easy to find a mentor. So a lot of people take references from each other. So what is your take on self-learning, self-realization, learning and reading books? Because a lot of people are not reading books at this point of time. And the third part is it has become difficult for people to understand who's your mentor and who's not your mentor. Just an advice doesn't mean that he's a mentor to you. So if you would want to touch base something on this part.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so much information on the internet, though, so many motivational videos on social media, WhatsApp. So it's important that one learns to filter what kind of information they should allow to come in and what information should not be allowed. And some people are lucky to get good mentors, and I would encourage people to find mentors if they can find. But if they are not able to find, it's important that you have that growth mindset within yourself, and you teach yourself. You explore through books, through videos, and be honest to yourself, and make a judgment which speaker or which author is actually resonating with your inner voice and is giving you the right advice. So one example I would give is right now there is a very strong culture of self-love being propagated across the world.
Right.
And in principle, the idea sounds very good, that one should love themselves. It's absolutely right. But people have been misinterpreting it by using it like self-love means, okay, I have worked so much, so I deserve an ice cream, or uh, some kind of relaxation. Indulging in something, and they're not able to push themselves. So for me, I'm quoting it from somewhere else. Self-love, the best definition is self-love is self-discipline. If you actually love yourself, you will make sure that you are giving your body and mind the things which is actually good for you.
Right.
So if you are disciplined, if you are eating well, if you are reading well, if you are working well, that is self-love, because that's best for your body and mind. And people try to give it a twist to pamper themselves. It's okay. I'm not against that. I don't want everybody to become a yogi, but one should use their judgment when they read this kind of self-help and self-love kind of stuff.
So one of the experiences that I had, and possibly I read some of your stuff as well. So there's one hypothesis that I want to test it through you. So young people out of college, I'm not referring to tier 1, 2, I'm referring to possibly tier 2, tier 3 colleges. They come for a job and they really want that job because they are not sure whether they'll get any job in the world or not, and they want to get started with it. They'll spend about 6 months, 9 months, and maximum a year's time. And there's little bit of arrogance that will come in. And the arrogance is because they'll feel that, oh, I could have done this. It's not that difficult. It's easy. It's just that they could not enter into the job ecosystem. And that arrogance leads to their downfall over a period of time, because they did not have a job, they did not think that they'll ever get a job, they got a job, and now the work that they're doing, they're finding it easy. So what happens is, instead of grilling for 9, 10, 12, 15 hours on that work, they'll start reducing the time that they'll invest on that work, and over a period of time the quality of output would diminish. So what would be your advice to people? Have you seen such behavior across the ecosystem? Is it happening in the society as such across layers and levels, or is there a particular group of people because where that is happening?
So I think there is a lack of clarity when people are passing out from their colleges as to what they want. And to some degree, I would understand that it's not clear because you don't know what you want to do for next 20 years because
Right.
you haven't seen the kind of options which are available. But at the same time, it's important and it's important that we or other people convey this to the young people just passing out from colleges, that it's important once you choose a job to get the most out of it, give it a decent amount of time and do it wholeheartedly, and then take
Right.
a call. At least
Right.
take whatever you can from that particular role. Don't lose that opportunity by being on two boards, always working there half-heartedly and thinking of some other job. Then you don't gain anything. Rather work hard, and maybe that could be a case that that job might not be suited for that person. But to know that, you need to push yourself and go beyond that. What I mentioned about the pain point, when you like
Right.
want to give up, you shouldn't give up the first time. It might be
Right.
your body and the mind just making up excuses that you don't want to help, basically don't want to work hard. So you need to cross that pain barrier, the resistance barrier, the procrastination barrier, and that would help you. That will permanently stay with you. So even if you change your job after that, you'll be a much better person in your next job, and you will not inculcate the habit of quitting easily.
Right. So let's talk about your book then. When you wrote the book, The Mind, The Final Frontier, or what was going in your head? Who was the audience for that book for you?
So honestly, as I told you, the idea came to my mind in a flash, and
Right.
I just started writing. So initially, there was no audience in my mind. I wrote it for myself. That was
Right.
the initial idea, and it was kind of a tribute or respect to all the philosophers I had read over a period of time, and I had written in a similar format, how they used to write it in 15th century and 16th century, which was unfortunately not a very entertaining, user-friendly way.
Way of
Yeah.
it's difficult to read them also.
Yeah. So it's very difficult to read the old philosophers because initially they wrote it for themselves, and so my idea was also to write it for myself. And only when I approached a publisher, and the publisher gave me an advice that you could tweak it in a certain way that it's more receptive for that audience, then I started changing it a little bit to make it more digestible and more easily accessible. Which I like. It's on the cards that I hope to rewrite the book with additional chapters and in a way that it's more accessible to a layman who doesn't have a background in philosophy.
Right. In your book, there are possibly 3 parts, if I'm correct, right? There are 3 parts that you've written. I'll start with part 1. In part 1, you talk about free will, expectations, and happiness. What do you really mean by that?
So free
What
will
do you
is a
want to touch on?
very fascinating topic. So there's a lot of research going on in various areas, from neuroscience to AI to biology to quantum physics. These subjects, they have all been trying to understand free will. So traditionally, the notion has been when the Newtonian physics came in. So the basic idea was every cause has an effect, and there is a chain of cause and effect. So if
Right.
you knew the status of universe at time equal to t0, and if you had enough computing power, you can predict the state of universe at t is equal to t1. So basically everything can be predicted. Even
Right.
us humans, we are made of atoms, and atoms are made of electrons and protons. So we would be determined by the same Newtonian principles. So it's just a matter of having that computing power, and it, at least theoretically, it is possible. So free will, from that point of view, had no place.
Right.
Then in the 1900s, the quantum mechanics came in, and Heisenberg gave the uncertainty principle, which took some edge off from the Newtonian physics, that everything is not determinate. But even then, if it is not determinate, the idea of free will did not stand, only because free will is possible only when there is a doer, an agent. So the presupposition is that there has to be a self who can decide either A or B.
Right.
But when you talk about a self, if you have you seen Men in Black, the movie?
Right.
There is a alien where in if you see it's the alien is in human body, and when they remove the head, there is a small person sitting with a controller. So traditionally we think of a self as somebody sitting inside our brain and taking our decisions. But the reality is there is no one sitting like that. It's all a process. You have those tissues, those neurons, they take in information and process it. And it's an automatic process. There is no one central orchestrator.
Right.
So from that point of view, again, free will was dismissed. Even if you can't predict it with certainty, like you can do in a Newtonian model, even then you cannot predict any event. So humans don't have a free will. So it has huge repercussions. So if you don't have free will, then how do you define ethics?
Right.
If ethics is defined,
morality.
Yeah. So how do you say, So, but it's a very tricky topic. So even your belief about having a free will, it's a paradox. You don't actually, you can't even decide. Your belief is also not in your control. So
in that way, it will impact happiness also, right? Because if you don't know what your beliefs are and how they would, as in, come into place, how would that impact their happiness? And how would a person be happy, especially in the young age? How do you find happiness then?
So happiness is also, I think, a very 20th century phenomenon. It's very difficult to define happiness, and that is why I write about happiness and expectations. So happiness has a very strong correlation with expectations. So if you take example of the lockdown right now, so a lot of people would actually, they used to believe that they need to go out, like let's say they go to the gym or they go to party, and that is happiness for them.
Right.
And in the initial days of the lockdown, they might be very unhappy. But now, since they know they don't have to go, they lower their expectations, and they might be happy now. So it's just a play of what kind of expectations you have and whether the actual events match up to those expectations. So I'm not saying one should reduce their expectations to be happy. I think it's a personal journey for everyone. They can choose to play around with the expectations and happiness equation. But at the back of everyone's mind, one should be aware that how these things work. So if you're chasing an elusive thing called happiness, let's say you want to earn a lot of money. So once you reach to point A, you would want to reach to point B, and then you'll never get satisfied. So maybe one can avoid a trap if they understand how the expectations and happiness work together.
So two things, right? You spoke about IPA framework in your book. So if you can elaborate a bit on IPA, that would really help the audience.
So IPA, I'll briefly elaborate. Whenever we have tried to understand how the mind works, we have always used analogies.
Right.
So when the computers were developed, so that was the most obvious choice of analogy for understanding how the brain or the mind works. So the basic principle behind how a computer, a CPU works is it takes in information, applies some algorithm and gives you an output. Similarly, our mind takes in information through our sensory our sense organs, the 5 sense organs, and whatever we think. And there is a well-defined system of processing that information. So there is a very critical distinction between two kinds of information. So there is whenever you touch a hot plate, you immediately remove your hand.
Right.
So that information processing is very specific, and it is very quick. It takes you might take you nanoseconds to react. So that is something we have learned through our evolution over thousands of years. So when the early living organisms who used to come in contact with a hot thing or anything harmful, let's say a predator, and if they would not react, they would die. They would die.
Right. Right.
Those who reacted, they got saved, and then their offsprings came in, and basically that particular genes got carried on.
Right.
So that became our instinct. We don't think. Whereas there could be some information processing which we learn during our lifetimes. So for example, you see your Facebook and you see a notification and somebody liked your pic. And it gives you a
instant gratification that you feel.
Gratification. Now that you have learned during this lifetime.
Right.
And the reaction time to that is also more compared to what your instinctive reactions would be.
Right.
So basically there are two categories of information processors within our body. It's not, I would say, categories, but quantitatively they're on a scale. So for certain kind of information, our reaction, our processing power is very fast because they're essential to our basic physical survival. And for others, we learn through a period of time during our lifetimes. So if the ones which we learn during our lifetimes, it is possible to rewire the brain easily. So if you learn something recently, and it's a bad habit, let's say, you can actually teach yourself to redo it.
Right.
And technically, going back, you can actually also rewire those instincts which the human gene learned millions of years ago. So for example, our survival strategy was that whenever we see a predator, the fight and flight response was activated.
Right.
So
even you have to negate the false positive there. You have to continue to respond the very same way that you had been responding to every predator that way.
Yeah.
Every segment of that. Yeah.
But now in today's world, we live in a much secure environment.
Right.
So the tools, the information processing hardware which we have was more suited for the times when we were living in the forests or in the wild. But we sometimes respond in a similar way. We start panicking when we see something which might actually not be very harmful to us.
Yeah.
So we can actually recode our brain and understand that this mechanism was very useful because it was meant for our survival. Because biologically, we are the same as we were 3,000 years ago.
Right.
Evolution takes a lot of time.
Right.
Thousands of years. So biologically, we are still the same, but the social factors, our external factors have changed drastically.
Right.
So we still respond in a similar way.
Right. So I'm not against any social platform as such, but one thing that I don't really like about those platforms is if you have 400 friends on any of these networks, mostly they'll share a positive stuff. There's a lot of, it's not balanced, it's tilted towards positive, fancy stuff, which you would see from 400 friends every single day. Something is happening and you feel that your life is not worth it because you're not able to do all that stuff. And it is not, people are not able to look into that aspect very logically, in that sense that it is not what it is. It is shown in a particular way to you, for you to react in a certain way. So one is reading. Is there any other thing that people can learn from anywhere on this particular aspect? And there are many such things happening across.
See, it's very important that once in a while we take a step back and try to reconnect with ourselves. We calmly situate ourselves within ourselves and spend some time alone. So, like to the young people, I always advise, no matter what, for me, the highest priority is my physical and mental fitness. And I make it a point to allocate some time for it every day, no matter how busy I am. Because that's the bedrock on which everything would stand. So physical fitness, obviously people understand it better. You can go to the gym, play a sport, but mental fitness is equally important. And if you are mentally fit in that sense, if you are more aware of yourself, your body, how you're reacting to certain information, automatically you'll make a better judgment of what kind of information you should let in, be it information on social media. So if you see something and your awareness level is high, you would be able to understand that this person has put up a profile pic and is trying to project a very happy way of life, which might not actually be the case. And you can actually see that reaction happening within your body. You're not stopping it. You can see maybe I am getting a little insecure that person has an amazing life and I don't have it. And if you're aware about it, it will not actually affect you that much. You'll respond much better.
Right. I understand that. So any final thoughts, Ravi, if you have to talk to a 20-year-old guy who's just getting out of college and possibly doing his first job, any message that you would want to leave him with, and what are the things that he should keep in mind when he's building a career or life out of the thing that he has decided to do?
It's very difficult to advise a 20-year-old, first of all. No matter what we tell them, I think most of them would go on to make some mistakes and learn from those mistakes.
Right.
So I would reiterate that no matter what, first make sure that you work on your physical and mental fitness all the time. If you work on your mental and physical fitness, you'll make better decisions. And thirdly, I would say invest time in people around you, be it your friends, be it your family, be it your colleagues, because it is not just going to be a skill set for the future, because people are becoming less social, and it is actually an asset if a person has the ability to go and talk to many people, because mostly people are becoming very reclusive now.
Right.
So not only such a person would excel in whatever work he or she is doing, but they'll also have a very healthy personal life.
Right. And personally, you have inspired me on many aspects. I still remember some of the stories, some of the ways that you conduct yourself. That's been a learning for me. One line that I remember from you, मैंने तुझसे एक बार पूछा था कि क्या करना चाहता, तूने बोला मैं देश के लिए बहुत अच्छा करना चाहता हूँ. There's one thing that I really, as in remember from the first year, second semester, that when you said that कि क्या करना है, देश के लिए कुछ करना. It's been a pleasure talking to you, Ravi, and thank you for coming.